Hey everyone, happy Thursday or maybe even Friday, depending on your time zone. I'm joined by Lilith. Lilith is a fellow atheist. She runs the Veritas Voices podcast, and I actually interviewed her co-host some time ago, and I thought this would be a good conversation to have. How's it going, Lilith?
Very well, Abdullah. Thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome. So let's get to it. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So you are an atheist. So how did you become an atheist?
Well, it's in some ways not a very unique story. I was raised Christian, and I really took it very seriously. Even from a very young child, I studied all the stories. I tried to understand. I tried to really get invested in this because the core ideas that support Christianity and the idea that you need to be saved were implanted in me from a very, very young age. I don't think my parents realized how soon I understood that apparently I deserved damnation for existing. Or, for any minor sin I might have committed during existing, which I didn't necessarily have to understand to be a sin.
Yeah.
Not terrifying at all. I went through various stages. My parents started out as Jesus freaks. It's sort of Christian hippies, 10 years behind culture, as is pretty typical of Christian culture, which are all about, the free music and worship, and we're not about rules, but in reality, they're the most legalistic group you will ever meet in your life. They just think that because they wear jeans and have a drummer and a guitarist on stage, they're not being legalistic.
Yeah.
When they're like, side hugs. Oh, that's a whole other ball of wax.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and then my parents sort of moved to more moderate positions, and as they moved through various churches.
Oh, looks like I lost you there.
Whenever we, have you lost my video?
Yeah, it's back now.
There we go. Sorry.
We're good. Yeah. So I lost you. Yeah, you were saying about. Go ahead. Can you repeat last minute or so?
Okay, yeah. Ultimately, I went to a Baptist leadership training program. Did a lot of, I guess I considered it a lot of study. It was still evangelical, so there were a lot of assumptions made about who wrote the Gospels, for example, that were never justified. And I really didn't have a concept of how much they needed to be justified. Basically, ultimately, fast forward many years, I'm struggling with defining faith in a way that isn't totally absurd. And I start doing a lot of research. And as you know, the foundations of both Islam and Christianity are found in Judaism and the Jewish idea of God.
Yeah.
What ultimately broke my faith, although there were lots of personal difficulties as well, that basically it didn't cause me to leave. It just caused me to stop making excuses for God. Sort of like the toxic relationship where you're like, I'm done covering your ass. I'm just done. You're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet now. What it ultimately came down to was the discovery that the God of the Bible, there was nothing unique. There was nothing special. There was nothing profound about the God of the Bible. That in fact, he was a retcon mashup of several Canaanite deities with a bunch of stolen Persian ideas. And I knew that Persian ideas had kind of, influenced thought broadly. I'm like, okay, people sharing ideas, expanding their minds, that's fine. But when I realized that you could see it often even in the English translation, where it says the Lord in all sort of lowercase capitals, but capitals.
Yeah.
It's referencing Yahweh. And when it refers to God, it's referencing El or El Elohim. Those are 2 different gods. They never were the same God initially. Yahweh was the southern god that Judah worshipped, that they had taken from the area near where they call Moab, that had a city to his name, which might have actually been named Yahoo, which is hilarious.
Yahoo, the internet
Yeah,
company? Yeah.
I know. Israel Finkelstein has found some very interesting things, and he's not the only one.
Have you read his book?
I've got his book. I haven't read through it all. I initially got in with Dan Barker and the documentary, The Bible's Buried Secrets. And then, of course, I found Israel Finkelstein, and I've been sort of cross-referencing a lot of things.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's cross-referencing that archaeological discovery with the literary criticisms that you might find in, say, Karen Armstrong's A History of God.
Yes.
And honestly, the simplest sort of conglomeration of this information, because El was the northern god whose symbol was a bull. Hello. Bull. They even talk about having the bull statues that they worship God at in the north because they didn't want to go to the southern temple.
I wonder if that's connected to the Moses and the making the calf and the golden calf that they worship.
I think so, because a great deal of the Moses stuff was written by the priestly source, which is basically you're telling
me Moses didn't write Genesis, even though it talks about Moses?
No, God did not get him massively high off the burning bush and take him on a tour through the cosmos. Which would at least have been far more interesting. But no, sadly, all he has is his burning bush. And a lot of those stories inspired by Gilgamesh and all that sort of stuff, other literature at the time. But they included a lot of things in there that were like knocks at the Northern Kingdom of Israel, but also still taking some of their literature and working it in. No, we were always on the same side. We were always family, except you guys kind of fucked up. But it's okay, because we were always, and the thing is, when I was on, like I said, the best sort of summary of it that I ever saw was on Evidence's well-known series, Why I Am No Longer a Christian.
Oh, okay.
And the thing is, because I took it seriously, because I really, really believed and really, really focused on all the stories that I possibly could, I knew too much to think that this was bullshit, because I instantly, things in the Old Testament made sense that had never made sense before. I'm like, oh my God, that's why that, and that's why that, and that's why that. And like 10,000 things fell into place. And I went, oh, fuck. And you can never unsee it.
Yeah. Once the genie's, I always tell Muslims, once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't get the genie back in there, right? Once you see Islam from a perspective of a disbeliever, sometimes I get people telling me, just read the Quran again. And they don't realize, like we have a WhatsApp group with a few friends, ex-Muslim friends, and they're like, I'm reading the Quran. When I read the Quran as a former Muslim, it was like, wow, look at all of these absurdities. But you don't think about them, right? Like, for example, one of my friends was saying, one of the worst verses in the Quran to him, one of his most disliked verses is in the Quran. It says, the believers will laugh at the disbelievers on the day of judgment and say, like, haha. And even as a Muslim, and I was like, even as a Muslim, that struck me strange, because we're supposed to have like empathy for these people and wish them to be guided. And why would you laugh at them? Like,
people who possess empathy often work their way either to more liberal versions of their faith or out altogether.
Or they just have cognitive dissonance and just don't, like, for me, like I was just somehow went over my head, right? I wanted to ask you, I want to put on my apologist hat. I don't really have any.
Please do.
Put on. But like, why would it be false if the story is common? Like, let's say the Gilgamesh, Epic of Gilgamesh has the same story in it, for example, a big flood or whatever. Why would that necessarily mean that the God of the Bible or the Quran is not true? Isn't it just like human beings, the same God is revealing the same story to other people?
I have heard that kind of excuse. For me, when it came to seeing, because what I always believed, and what I believed even as like the external layers of literalism and fundamentalism were peeled away by reality, I still believed that there was some fundamental core of the divine, something that God had inspired that was, truly numinous. And that was the core was what I believed in. When it came down to the core, it wasn't just that stories were borrowed from Gilgamesh. I knew that. It was that the God, that it was an entirely man-made creation out of two, at least, petty desert deities who you just like, it's the same, it becomes exactly the same as Zeus. El, the northern god, he was basically the Zeus of that era. God of the sky, over the mountain. His symbol's a bull. His wife is Asherah. His son is Baal. It's exactly the same. I can't put that on a higher level than Zeus once I know that. So once you're seriously considering that, then you have to seriously consider Odin, Thor, all these other mythologies. And granted, in the around the time that Christianity sprouted, there were actually a lot of, say, Greeks who found some similar themes and characterizations in Egypt, for example. And they said, well, these stories aren't literal. These are, different manifestations of the same divine essences of, love or death or whatever. Sort of blended a little bit. And maybe that was the best they could do at the time. But ultimately, once you realize that faith is belief based on conviction, whether the evidence goes there or no, it's dishonest, and I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I see it is there's two possibilities. Oh, by the way, your mic was cutting out a bit, but it seems like it's got better now. Funny thing is, when I started talking, it got better. So it must be the stream platform.
Oh no!
Now it's good. So what I was gonna say was, there's two ways to look at it. Human beings have been making up stories, and they love stories, and they love passing on stories. And as they pass on stories, the stories change. That is also a viable hypothesis. It may actually be the case that these are just made up stories. So we can't say for sure just because the story comes from a previous story that it's false, but it is, to me, it's a red flag, because what you're seeing is...
But even if it comes from it's like the game of telephone. They constantly say, you pass the things along. So even if there's some core of truth way the hell back there, like there was totally 5 dudes who escaped Egypt and came and told their story to Canaanites because, oh my gosh, it was so dramatic, which it probably was. If that's all there is to the Exodus, that's the original story might have been really awesome, but that's not proof of God and manna and clothes that never wear out and presumably grow with your children. The rest of it is
So what I was gonna say was, have you read the History of God by Karen Armstrong?
No, some of it, but not the whole.
I actually read, I didn't get up to the Islam part, but I found the part about Christianity very interesting. Like the Bible, she talks about the same thing that you were saying, that there's actually multiple authors of the Bible, and using modern historical methods, they're able to determine, like you were saying, there's different styles, right? And there's different, and it's actually like the different authors had different perspectives of God.
Oh, that's the documentary hypothesis. It's become the foundation of biblical criticism for more than 100 years.
Oh, wow.
She just sort of put it together with other observations and made it a little clearer for people. But like I said, there's the Yahwist and the Elohist source, which are the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, whatever papers they had managed to save from the destruction of the temple. They worked into the scriptures wholesale. There's the Deuteronomist, which is Josiah, I think, the child king, and Hezekiah, or bugger, what was the name of that priest? The high priest who found a book of the law.
So
when they were doing construction in
the specific stories in the Bible, I'm not even familiar with. The ones that end up in the Quran, I know those ones. So I don't know the ones that are like only in
I had a Muslim trying to convince me that it was totally okay for Abraham to offer his son because you guys have an extended version where the devil's trying to dissuade him and Ishmael is totally on board with being murdered.
The devil's trying to tell him, don't kill your son. And
I know.
Who's the devil, actually?
Bastard.
Like, you have to wonder, like, which one's the actual devil? The one saying kill your son, or the one saying don't kill your son?
You'd think.
And so you mentioned Israel Finkelstein. Finkelstein is another great author, which unfortunately I haven't read his books or seen his documentary Bible Unearthed, but I've kind of heard the summary of the arguments that there's no good archaeological evidence for Exodus. Frankly speaking, there's no good evidence that Abraham even existed, or Moses, or Noah, or Adam, even Adam.
Oh, right? Well, there's definitive proof that they didn't in most cases. Adam, certainly. I mean, we can trace common ancestry in genetics, and we also know how genetics works. And there was never fucking just two people. Nor in evolution is there ever a first human. As for Exodus, this was what Israel Finkelstein did that was so remarkable, because there has always been a lack of evidence or some, stories of this sort of legendary stuff, very contrived, very overinterpreted to try and find evidence of the Exodus, or sometimes just plain out faked. But he found the original story of Israel, how it actually came about. And that they were just Canaanites.
Oh, and then the original story of the Exodus, how it came about?
No, like the actual origin of Israel. There was a large city that it was not Egypt. It was in Canaan, but it was, I believe, paying tribute to Egypt. Egypt was the garrisoning power at that time. And it was overthrown by a rebellion of the slaves and the underclass. Which they can tell because the city's destroyed, but there's not a lot of weapons or very improv ones. And a lot of things are destroyed specifically that have to do with the culture, like smashing the faces of the gods or the statues of rulers and things like that, which, if you're a vengeful mob of slaves that are sick of this crap, that's, totally going to pull down the statues of Saddam Hussein. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's fascinating that when someone like me, who has a lot of assumptions, so I have a very Islamicized interpretation of the Bible, and the things that I was taught, we were taught that, for example, Islam is a continuation of the Abrahamic religion, and you're kind of given a narrative that you buy into, that Abraham built the Kaaba, and he settled there, even though when you start to look, and then Islam is a continuation. But then when you learn about the Bible and the problems with the Bible, it's earlier down the line where the problems start. The problems don't start with the Quran, right? The problems actually go further back, like the walls. A lot of the stories of the prophets, maybe they existed, maybe they didn't, but there's evidence that, just like with the Quran, I find a lot of this. It's specifically with the Quran, there's evidence in Syriac sources for the stories. And you're saying even with the Bible, we know where some of these stories are coming from, right?
And that's the thing, is that it's not just influences, it's actual full sources in many cases. And there's just nothing left there to hold on to as any kind of a divine concept, or certainly nothing more profound than every other primitive superstition going at the time. And that's the thing, is that over time, this is one of the ways I know there is no God, is because nobody can keep a consistent definition. I've noticed that with sermons, definitely, but even often with apologetics, they rely on your own mind to kind of fill in all the gaps with your idea of God. So once you start actually trying to hold it to a consistent standard, it completely just. I remember referring to it as a chewed gum that rolled through a junkyard, just picking up bits of everything on its way, and then we try and pretend it's this great, magnificent, No, it's a mega super concept of God. It's just so far beyond our understanding.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it's like conflicting everything, nonsense everywhere. But it's a mystery.
It's interesting that even in the Bible, and that's another thing Karen Armstrong brings up, earlier sort of images or representations of God were much more anthropomorphic. For example, God walking in the garden, God wrestling with who was it? Joseph?
Jacob.
Jacob, yes.
Hit him with a crotch shot too. God cheated.
Oh yeah.
Jacob had him pinned. Oh yeah. He touched his thigh and crippled him, by which let's just say in the vernacular of the day, that meant something a little
something. Hit him in the crotch or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that it represents God like a man, and then when you're Muslim and you're reading this, the only way you can kind of interpret it is, oh, that's corrupted. But there's actually, now here's an interesting thing. Now this is maybe when we'll get into talking about Islam. It's interesting that there's no real evidence that the Bible was corrupted from the perspective of like the Quranic story being true. So for example, like the stories in the Bible about Jesus being God, let's say the New Testament, that's not corrupted. That was originally what it was all about. Like the New Testament, the Gospels were all about making Jesus God. Once Jesus was killed and he died on the cross, the Messianic Jews who believed that he was a Messiah now had to come up with a way of dealing with the fact that the Messiah, who they thought was going to become the ruler and have 12 tribes and to reestablish the kingdom of God, he was now dead on the cross like a common criminal. So that's when Christianity was born, right?
Well, and that's
Jesus was never. Jesus was always just a regular prophet. There's nothing special about him other than
who got killed, because that is the fate of prophets. It's very dramatic. They almost all die tragically.
Yeah, the martyr complex, right?
I know. It's like Christians keep saying, well, what about all these people who died and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, first of all, you have no idea where those stories of martyrdom come from. And some of them are totally batshit. Like they come from a place where you survive beheadings because Jesus.
Yeah.
And then, and then it's like, why would they do that? Martyr stories sell. They've always sold.
Yeah.
Oh, the dramatic tragedy. There are entire genres of literature based on this. Of course it ended up in the story.
Yeah. There's something very human about stories, right? It's like it's this whole thing that with religions as well, that they use stories to kind of influence us and to make us, follow and believe, and it's like we are the minority here, like atheists, you know what I mean? It's always been for the majority of mankind, it's always been the minority who have been atheists. And this might actually change now. I think that we're reaching a point in time where things are changing, and the internet is one big reason. The globalization of information is basically changing that. But for the majority of humankind, we've always been superstitious, religious apes. You know what I mean?
We are. We're, as Hitchens was so fond of pointing out, not fully rational. We're half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, and don't you think it shows? It certainly does.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not surprised about stories, because I remember, gosh, I can't even remember where, I heard an anthropologist who was discussing history. And the thing is, before writing was invented, because writing is a tremendous technological leap, it allowed people to connect across distance and time in ways totally incomprehensible before.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had an idea before, that idea died with you unless you could get group to remember it. So you go, you tell your idea to them, they repeat it back to you. They're like, okay, this is the exchange. And one of the best ways to actually carry on those ideas is through stories.
Yeah.
That's why myth was so fundamental, not because these things actually occurred in this way, but because, and this is actually touches on what I learned about Islam and where, because the myths of a people are their first fiction. And fiction doesn't tell you what happened, it isn't history. But what it does tell you about a people is their values. It tells you their dreams, their hopes, their fears, what they admire, what they hate, what drives them.
Yeah.
Who they had a beef with. It tells you these things. It tells you more about the soul of a culture than a history book ever would.
Yeah. And it unites people, right? I mean, Yuval Harari in *Sapiens* talks about how the idea of a common belief in a spirit or a common spirit god or a common god has always been used to unite people and to build empires, like Emperor Constantine, the caliphs of Islam. I mean, even Muhammad. I mean, Muhammad is the best example out of any other example there, that he united all of these polytheist, pagan tribes under one banner. And then obviously when he died, they all rebelled and they tried to kill each other. I don't know if you know about this, but when he died, there was huge apostasy wars to keep them in line. They're like, we're not going to pay. They were paying zakat, which was, 2.5% of wealth, but also like so many sheep and goats and so much wealth that had to be passed on to the caliph, who was Muhammad. And when he died, they're like, we're not going to pay this. Right? We're done.
Right. The profit is gone. Why should we pay that?
And then they had to fight wars to get them back in line, because if you leave zakat, you're an apostate. You're no longer, according to Abu Bakr and the caliphs, because of course it's very important to get the money, right?
With the apostasy, very bad. The
zakat is supposed to be used for poor Jews, so I don't know exactly why that would be such an important thing for them to collect it. And technically it should be just, I mean, nowadays that goes back to
the flavor of a post hoc rationalization. Well, of course you give to the church will take care of the poor. Of course you give to the caliph, how else will we take care of the poor? And it's like, it's sort of like the old story of, Judas was like, oh, the poor box, and stiffing out the bottom. I kind of think that was projection on the part of a lot of Christian ministers, let's just say.
I think that's a really good point. I feel like with religion in general, that if you go back to the original, like way back, I think what we have today would be unrecognizable to the founders of the religion, because it's changed so much. Like Kenneth Armstrong talks about this too in the book, how God has become this sort of abstract sort of entity.
Exactly.
Back then it was like he was almost seen like a god man, like literally a man in the sky. Right?
Well, and much more like the ideas of gods that we so easily dismiss, like Thor and Odin and Set and all the rest of it. These were super-powered gods. They are super-powered people. They were what Aaron Ra points out is really the most effective definition of a god: magical, anthropomorphic immortals.
Yeah.
That's it. Definitions are honestly, keeping the obscurity in definitions is how religion usually maintains things, because I know Christians, and probably Muslims too, will become horrifically offended if you point out that miracles are magic.
Yeah.
And they will be they're not the same thing. They're different. Magic is of the devil. And I'm like, right, because magic is the invocation of supernatural powers to predict or alter future events, whereas miracles is the invocation of supernatural powers to predict or alter future events.
Yeah.
So different. So different.
Yeah. It's true. Like, actually, a lot of exactly. Actually, every single miracle you can think of is magic, basically, right? Like splitting the seas or whatever. The only difference is who's doing the magic, right? Who's doing the magic trick?
Well, and it's demons are very necessary to it. Like, if you take your faith seriously in a fundamentalist sense, they're very necessary. Because the minute you admit that Hindus, for example, might be having irrational hallucinations because they're engaging in disciplines out of nowhere and starving themselves and meditating for 3 days, and you're going to see something weird anyway, and so that doesn't actually justify Hinduism, then you might have to apply the same standard to your own beliefs, and then literally everything in revealed knowledge is totally fucked.
Yeah.
But it could be demons. It's the bad spirits trying to trick them away from the Jeebus.
Yeah. If you just want to, just going by thought experiments, as a Muslim, I had someone ask me this, is my cousin actually, and I was trying to preach to him. I mean, I was this good Muslim trying to convert everybody to Islam. Even my Muslim family was never religious, right? Like my cousins and stuff.
They weren't zealous. They were just.
They weren't religious at all. They were not practicing, right? And so I became this sort of, like, in the family, me and my younger brother reconverted, or we don't call it born again, but you could say it's kind of like again. We became zealous all of a sudden. And what happened was I was trying to convert him, and he was trying to be very logical. He's a very logical guy. And he was trying to be logical, and he's asking me, well, how do you know for sure that the one that was doing the revelation was actually the creator of the universe? What if it was like a demigod? How would you know? And I was like, I couldn't really answer that question, because it's true. Like, if it was a devil, I mean, he didn't say devil, but I mean, even a devil, devil doing the revelation, how would you know if it's an evil god? There's no way to know that it's the ultimate final creator, that it could be just an alien playing a trick on us, or there's no way to actually.
And that's the thing. There's a revelation is revelation to that person alone. It is hearsay to everyone else. And I am not obligated to build my life on hearsay. But it's worse than that, because as it's been pointed out, let's say you have 6 people who say they had a revelation from God, and they have totally different revelations. 3 of them are lying. 2 of them are crazy. 1 is telling the truth. How do you know which one? Pick one.
A good point. That's a good point. Like, why would God use a method of revelation that's so prone to falsehood, like so prone to deception? Like, it's like I'm gonna send you the most important email of your life to email, and it could be phishing. Like, I mean, nowadays,
one word at a time through birds or something. Like,
even like if I call you from a number now, like nowadays we get so many false, like, people calling you that don't actually use that number. It's just a random number made up. You have no idea who's calling you. But like, if this was the most important call of all, wouldn't, like, it should be hand delivered, or someone should actually come and give you a letter in person or something like that.
We can registered mail, but God doesn't apparently do that.
Yeah, and it's like there's no way to know for sure whether this was just a made up thing or whether it's true. It's just, it doesn't make it for the most important message. And Hassan Radwan, I have to thank him for bringing this up. And I tweeted this; it was very popular. For something that's so horrifically bad, if you get it wrong, like the worst punishment imaginable, why is the evidence so, like, mediocre?
Crap.
Yeah, exactly. It's like unconvincing, right? At best.
This is the question that, because when, for example, Christian apologists are trying to argue for the resurrection of Jesus, and they'll say, oh, it's the best attested event in history, which is completely bogus. They're completely talking out their ass.
Yeah.
But that's the line they're trying to sell. And they'll say that when we point out possible natural explanations for things, they'll say, well, that's just because you discount miracles out of the gate. No, it isn't. Simple Bayesian reasoning, what is most probable? Think about this. Think about the most religious person you have ever known. The most sold on whatever version of God they're smoking. Think about, by their most generous estimate, how many miracles could be happening on the planet in, let's say, the next 24 hours. Miracles and fulfilled prophecies. The most religious, their highest number. Think about that number. You don't have to have one, just get an idea of what that would feel like. Now, given what we know of human nature, Think about how many lies and mistakes are going to happen on the planet Earth in the next 1 hour.
Yeah.
Which of those numbers is bigger?
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah. It's some Muslims would say that miracles are. Here's the thing. A lot of people will now say that, well, we still get like small miracles, but these big miracles are all done now that the last prophet is gone. But again, it begs the question as to, why so there's so many problems with this narrative. One is, why is it, if life is a test, why is it that these prophets will show these miracles that are like mind-blowing? Doesn't that just defeat the whole purpose of life being a test? And then how come they got that and all we get is this book that's supposed to be convincing?
Which is contradictory in and of itself, which, at least with regard to the Quran, I believe is admitted in apologetics when it said that if there's a conflict, a later verse supersedes an earlier verse. That rule would never have had to be invented if there weren't conflicts in the Quran.
Yeah, the whole abrogations thing is a hairy topic. It's even among Muslims, there's some debate about abrogations. Can the Quran abrogate itself? Does it ever? Because I mean, clearly there's like earlier verses that say, for example, stay away from prayer if you're intoxicated, and then eventually it's just like, do not consume intoxications, period. They're the work of the devil, gambling, and intoxicants. So there's like a progression, but in terms of like other things, there is actually disagreement. Some people say there's no such thing as abrogations. Like some schools of thought consider there is. It's very confusing because why would God need to abrogate? But in the Quran itself, it actually says that Allah says to Muhammad that, I don't make you forget a verse, except I'll give you a better one or a similar one. I know, it's funny, right? Like, I'll make you forget one, I'll give you a similar one. What? Why would you do that? And even the whole story of Islam being this sort of final revelation that comes to like fix the previous revelations. So God purposely let them get corrupted, but he won't let the Quran get corrupted. I mean, did he change his mind?
Yeah, I don't know. Well,
right?
Apparently, for one, revelations need to be fixed. And for another, it's the most important revelation in history. So, of course, he's just going to retell a bunch of stories that were already in circulation because that's, I mean, what could possibly be more important than a retcon?
Yeah. And apparently it's super, super bad. Now, here's another thing, like modern Muslims. Okay, let's talk about what we had this idea that we were going to talk about things about Islam, and I was going to like sort of fact check them. So one of the things that came up on Twitter was this whole thing about the religion of peace.
See, Islam has a branding issue where it calls itself the religion of X good thing, usually right before it calls for the opposite.
Yeah.
Like the signs that say behead those who say that Islam is not a religion of peace. And I'm like, are you not seeing? It's right. Or that woman, the teacher in somewhere in Africa, who had allowed children to name the class teddy bear Muhammad, and they all take the teddy bear home, and then literally so many Muslims saying Islam is the most tolerant religion, but she must die.
Yeah, there's some massive cognitive dissonance there. I think those posters that say behead those who, what was it?
Behead those who say that Islam is not a religion of peace. They were being held by protesters, raging Muslim protesters, whenever there was a fuss about.
I wonder if those are doctored or photoshopped, because I've seen two groups of Muslims, two sort of kind of ideas of Muslims. There's definitely the majority where these like moderate. I don't even know if that's a good term, moderate Muslims, but Muslims that are willing to live, in a secular society.
Live and let live.
Yeah, live and let live, secular society, like my religion is my business. They always quote lakum dinukum waliya deen, which means to me, my religion, to you, your religion, which is a verse in the Quran. And, they're willing to vote in democracy and define, that would be the majority, I would say, in the Western world. I don't know about Egypt or whatever, right? I'm saying from my experience as a Canadian Muslim, this was majority. Then there's the religious ones that are inclined to, let's say, Salafism or Wahhabis, also known as Wahhabism. There's the Islamists who want to re-establish some sort of political, the Caliphate, Hizb ut-Tahrir, or political sort of implementation of Islam that includes chopping off the hands and all of that stuff. Those people don't say Islam is peace. The ones that say Islam is peace are the moderate Muslims, but they don't say behead those who say Islam is not the religion of peace, because that's a contradiction right there.
It is.
Yeah, and the ones who,
I remember it was just when someone was killed it was the author of the Satanic Verses.
Oh, Salman Rushdie.
When Salman Rushdie was condemned for writing a novel they, even in say the UK, 30% of Muslims surveyed actually thought he deserved to die.
Yeah, including
that's not a majority.
Cat Stevens, right? He mentioned something to that effect, right? Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
So that was a while ago, though. Things have, honestly, things have changed so dramatically, in my opinion, my personal opinion.
No, you've been on the inside of Islam. I haven't been on the inside.
Not just that. I mean, I'm involved in this wave of apostasy that's happening, right? And I'm seeing the effects. I mean, it's still kind of a minority movement, and it's not yet mainstream. But things like the repercussions, it's like a butterfly effect or whatever, right? Like the repercussions are being heard in mosques all over the world, that people are actually talking about atheism, people are talking about doubts, Muslims are having conferences about these things, and Muslims are becoming way more liberal. I mean, there's also people becoming more fundamentalist. So I mean, that's also happening at the same time.
Thing is happening in Christianity. For example, I think
Christianity is like 100 years ahead in terms of what we're seeing.
In terms of some things, yeah, because it had to adapt through the Enlightenment, so it had to kind of, But say in North America, the States particularly, there used to be a lot more sort of moderate Christians who would be a little more, sure, evolution is fine or whatever, or, we can kind of, there's more to it. It's more in depth. We need to, interpret in the experience of whatever. A lot of those people are becoming atheists now, but a lot of them are also becoming fundamentalists instead. So it seems to be dividing. The middle class of moderation is quickly vanishing.
Yeah.
And that can become dangerous, because I know that fundamentalists are willing to destroy the world for their ideas. How do you think we ended up with the Dark Ages, in Europe at least?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that it's terrifying to me, because a lot of people who used to be moderate believers, they don't understand exactly how crazy it gets on the other side, and that people legitimately believe these ridiculous things. They're like, oh, nobody believes that in a modern. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They literally believe the most crazy shit you could imagine. And that's, it's really hard to convince people of. But you spoke of an apostasy wave. I'm really glad that it's happening in Islam. There's also been a kickback against the fundamentalists of North America, fundamentalist Christians. You follow Chrissy Stroop?
No, I have no idea what that is.
She is the co-author of the book, or co-editor, I suppose, of the book Empty the Pews. If you've seen that hashtag, it's been a lot of people who, honestly, because of Trump and just the Tea Parties and the horrific things that Christian fundamentalists and evangelicals have been doing, I stepped away from evangelical Christianity. Some of them became moderate Christians. Some of them are just like, fuck it, I'm out. But the number of stories of the ways that they've been deeply harmed by the indoctrination, by the abuse of an authoritarian system, by being taught there was something wrong with them because maybe they were gay or whatever, and then being sent to torturous camps to, fix them. It's these stories are coming out, and there's people saying, oh, how could this happen with the evangelicals? How could the Christians all support? And there's other people going, hello, We are literally writing books about why this works this way. Here's all of our experiences.
Yeah.
This is why they're doing it. Read.
Yeah.
So there's a kickback against this kind of brutal fundamentalism. And I think that's great. If Christian, apostates and Muslim apostates can get together and push back, especially against the more abusive forms of faith.
I mean, that's what we're doing right now.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's good. Like, I feel like, as I was discussing with you before, there's a certain crowd that shows up on ex-Muslim channels, and a lot of them are Christian. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just, sometimes I feel like there's some cognitive dissonance there, where how is it that you have all of these problems with Islam? Okay, from a perspective of being good for the world or bad for the world, I can see why more people feel Islam is bad for the world. But I feel like people don't realize that Christianity was not, there's this perspective, and it's being popularized by people like maybe Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, and that all of the Western sort of goodness is coming from like Judeo-Christian. They don't say Judeo-Christian Islamic, Judeo-Christian values.
With Judeo-Christian, Jews never use the term Judeo-Christian because it's bullshit. It's something that Christians invented to try and make it sound like whatever they were putting forward had more than one faith behind it, and thus was more inclusive and had more authority. It's complete bullshit.
The Muslims do that too, Abrahamic, right? Yeah,
exactly. Honestly, there's something, and a lot of people will be like, oh, you have faith in science, blah, 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 blah. And the thing I point out most is that after the Enlightenment was a pushback against the church. And you can't just, don't just read Voltaire's Candide. Read what ministers and priests were saying at the time. He was not on your side. He was pulling people away from it. But then also, and this is the thing, if you just, this is why people need to read just selections, just a few selections from throughout history of thought, because you see that faith is being dragged kicking and screaming all the way. And the idea that like you could have faith in science, if you have faith in science, you're not doing it right, because science isn't a collection of knowledge. It's a method.
Yeah.
It's a method of literally systematic doubt.
Yeah. Isn't
what is the opposite of faith? Doubt.
Yeah.
They couldn't be more opposite.
But to some extent, isn't there some faith involved in the sense that, not faith, but trust in authorities, let's say. And it's a sort of faith as well, because you trust the method. I mean, our brain is known for taking shortcuts. We don't constantly reevaluate everything every single time. Like, for example, you see a face, you're doing a bunch of calculations, you're saying, this person looks friendly, this person looks dangerous, hostile, you're walking at night.
Are they, what's their physicality? Yeah.
Yeah, and someone's walking behind you, you start to think, okay, why is this person following me? Like, we have these sort of shortcuts. If you're a Muslim, you meet other Muslims, you instantly have this sort of bond with them. You're like, oh, this guy, or someone
same with Christians as you.
And so your mind is constantly, taking shortcuts, so it doesn't have to reevaluate, like gravity. I just assume, kids do this. They're like dropping balls and stuff and seeing what happens. They'll drop their food on the floor and smash. It makes a big mess everywhere. Look at that, science, and they're doing science, right? Eventually, they're like, okay, now I know what's going to happen. And they don't do it anymore. So in a sense, I think that the difference is that I agree it's not a good way to put it, that I have faith in science. It sounds like another religion. But in the same regard, I know that if I was to test it, it would work every single time. And the fact that prophecies, science gives us true prophecies, right?
And they work.
Yeah, like a good example. I love the example of Darwin's moth. You probably know it. I don't know if all of the viewers know it.
Yes, was that in Madagascar?
Yes, there was a type of flower he found that had a really narrow, long, the pollen was at the bottom or whatever.
Yeah, it was a very long, narrow, not the stem, I guess the bell of the flower.
I don't know the type of stem. And Darwin predicted we will find a bug that has a very long tongue or something like that, right? Like how would that
The
must have
proboscis
evolved?
was like
Yeah.
ridiculously long. It'll be
Yeah,
whatever it is.
and lo and behold, there is such a thing, right? And I'm going to show you my screen. It's like it's such an
Please
amazing,
do.
like it's just like, whoa, look at that, like look at that. That's like, whoa.
Oh my gosh.
It's like 5 times
Damn.
something, 10 times longer than its body, right? It's just like
That is way longer than any other moths.
yeah.
That guy is packing.
So like it's like how did he predict that? I mean, is he a prophet? Did God reveal something to him that there will be this moth that will like no, it's not like that. It's that it makes sense because he understood how once he understood evolution, he was able to predict that, oh, these things must have evolved in tandem. Right?
Yeah, and they're codependent.
Yeah.
Or at least now they are.
Yeah.
Initially, obviously not so much, but now they're totally codependent. But this is the thing. When people say I have faith in science, I reject that entirely, partially because I know they're trying to conflate it with their kind of faith.
Yeah.
But because of this, I will trust experts in science to a certain degree because they've gone and spent tens of thousands of dollars and years and possibly decades gaining the expertise to actually make sound judgments in a field. But anything they say is still subject to scrutiny, ideally by someone else who's also an expert and knows what they're talking about. And the predictive power is... It's more than just things like moth, although that one is a really cool example.
Yeah.
Only accurate information has practical application. Accurate information helps you navigate the world. Inaccurate information walks you into a wall.
Yeah.
Science doesn't need my faith. Science gave me an iPhone.
Yeah.
Faith did not give me this. God did not speak from his mountain and say, Steve Jobs, I give thee the schematic that shall bring forth this new technology. No, this did not happen. Science gave me this. Faith told me to interpret my feelings as God being there for me because apparently he couldn't do anything real.
And the best example is not even, I think, iPhone, but like curing cancer, curing like technology. Obviously, I work in technology, so I'm a big technology guy. But like even glasses, I mean, this is technology, right there. The fact that I can see properly, like the defect in my eye, the fact that I'm nearsighted, it's not because I mean, it's just the way I am. And my, one of my sons has glasses too. The rest of them seem to be perfectly fine without glasses for now. But it's, and like my wife's mother wears like, she has heavy collection on her glasses. My mom uses glasses. So we have technology that's actually improving our lives. What has kind of like, in the sense of like, why, and it comes back down to the problem of evil in a sense. Like,
I just want to say one thing. I was looking in the comments about Isaac Newton, who's saying mathematical axioms need faith. No, they don't. That's not what an axiom is. An axiom is something that is self-evidently true by definition. For example, if I say that the universe exists because the observable universe exists in the universe that it is being observed in, there's no way for that statement to be false.
Yeah.
It literally is itself. If I say 2 + 2 is 4, it's because by definition, this is 2 and this is 2, count them.
Yeah.
You can test it as many times as you like because it's an axiom. Axioms are true by definition. They don't require faith. They just require an understanding of language.
Yeah.
Which
and some people want to say God is an axiom. Like God existing, or God is a fundamental sort of existence.
I challenge them to provide a clear and consistent definition of God that can be put up for discussion.
Yeah.
When they do that and can stick to it through more than 3 questions consistently, I will be very interested to hear from them.
Yeah. I always say that because I get this a lot, that you need to believe in God before you consider the Quran, because a lot of times I'll get into discussions with Muslims and they'll say, well, do you believe in God? And I'm like, well, I used to. So clearly I'm open to the idea. But do you believe in God?
I changed my mind once.
Yeah, I do you believe in God now? No. Well, then forget the Quran. Well, I'm like, well, no, because to me, if you can prove the Quran is something extraordinary and uninventable by humans or whatever, then I would reconsider God. It's like, okay, well, it's like I don't believe in UFOs. I don't believe in aliens. UFOs are just unidentified flying objects.
Yeah.
I don't believe in aliens. Okay, well, you need to believe in aliens before you believe in spaceships. No, I don't. Show me the spaceship and I'll believe in aliens. Like, show me the fruit.
Real things don't need you to believe in them. Yeah. Pseudoscience does this, the woo people with their crystals. Oh, if you just, you accept the positive vibrations into yourself. No, real stuff doesn't work that way. Yeah. Real medicine can be administered when you're unconscious. You're not capable of believing in it. You're not conscious. Yeah. And yet it saves your life.
Yeah. Someone is asking about bringing up this example that the Quran says that, well, this is a common miracle claim that Pharaoh was, we will preserve his body, something like that, right? Now, the interesting thing is, there's actually, first of all, nobody knows. Pharaoh is a title. It's not even a name. It's a title. Pharaoh. The second thing is there's a lot of problems with that claim. I posted the link if anyone wants to read it. But a more plausible explanation of the verse in the Quran about the Pharaoh, we will preserve his body, is just, you can see this in some of the tafsirs, just that the body, according to the story, of course, none of this happened, but according to the story, the body was there for the Jews to see, the Israelites to see. Here he is. He's dead here. He drowned in the sea or whatever. Not that he was preserved till today. I mean, we have no idea that that's the same person, like supposed Pharaoh.
Well, and Pharaohs, like Egyptians have been doing the embalming thing for a long time.
Allah's taking credit for embalming now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, those people who embalm all their pharaohs and keep them around forever? They're going to do that to another pharaoh.
Yeah. It's like Hassan Ladwan was posting. It's like when Allah says, don't you see how Allah holds up the birds in the sky? That is Allah. Like, he's taking credit for everything, and it's like you have to worship.
Yeah, no, drag and physics holds the birds in the sky, or rather, physics is our understanding of the forces. But no, it's drag. It's drag. It's drag. It's wind pressure. No. Yep. And that's the other thing, is that nowadays they'll be saying that it's scientific evidence of God to say, oh, you can't explain the information in DNA because they're misusing the term information and not having anything to do with information theory, or abiogenesis, the origin of life, or the origin of the Big Bang.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we've been playing this game for tens of thousands of years. Before Christ, who was the famous doctor who said, we believe epilepsy to be supernatural because we do not understand it. Someday we will understand it and it will cease to be supernatural. Yeah. He was right.
Yeah.
He was Greek. He was probably an Epicurean, and he was right every single time. Sean Carroll said, science and faith. Every time one thing is attributed to God, science finds an explanation. If you have a horse who's lost every one of 1,000 races and a horse who's won every one of 1,000 races, and you're putting them up against each other, who are you going to bet on?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And frankly speaking, all of these miracle claims in the Quran, from the Quran or the Hadith or whatever, every single one of them fell flat on their face when I looked into them. As a Muslim, when I started to have doubts, I started to really, I think people, I think unfortunately one of the problems we have is we're not skeptics, and we're not skeptical enough. And people share these things on Twitter, and they see these things, Muslims hear these things from imams, but they don't look into it. They just accept it at face value. And it's unfortunate, right?
For example, Christians will take the claims about how many copies of the New Testament there are as being this astounding number of, way more than anybody else. which is fine as long as you don't look into it. They're including transcripts all the way to the 16th century in that number. 0 in the first.
Yeah.
3 or 4 in the second, and those are fragments.
Yeah.
So, and even the scholars who actually read the texts say there are more errors or switched words or inconsistencies in the New Testament than there are words in the New Testament. Yeah, some of them are minor.
Yeah.
Some of them are completely understandable. One, I think, was someone was writing out the Gospel of Luke, the beginning, where they've got so the father of so and so, the father of so and so, and it was in columns, and so he started reading across because presumably he had just checked out mentally. So he ended up saying that the father of God was blah blah blah, and his father was Malachi or whatever. And it's like, oh gosh, you poor thing. I'm sure they didn't. You probably needed coffee, but there wasn't any.
And the Muslims actually use this as a point for Islam. They say, well, look at the Old Testament. There's this big mess of thing, but the Quran is only one Quran, and it's the same for everybody. But there's a lack of information there. There's a lack of understanding that actually, well, first of all, in a way, it was kind of a smart thing to do. When Uthman, the third caliph, he burned all of the Qurans, except for one version, right? And there was conflicts among the companions of the Prophet, according to the narrations we have. There was conflicts about this. Some of them didn't want to hand over. Ibn Masud didn't want to hand over his codex, but the order was everybody needs to burn the Qurans except for one version, right?
Yeah.
And that's the version we have today. The problem is, do we know for sure?
And how many years after was that?
That was after Muhammad died. So it wasn't.
How many years?
I'm not totally sure, but it was basically during the first, I think it's within the first maybe 50 years. I don't know. Not totally sure. But after Muhammad died, there was this problem that they didn't have the Quran in one form, in one book. So that was the first thing they did, was they put it into a book form. But there was competing copies, and even to this day, most Muslims don't know. Scholarly Muslims know this, but most Muslims are not aware that even in the Arabic, there are actually multiple variant readings with different words. And
I heard, actually, I wanted to confirm this with you. I heard that the version of the precise wording on the Dome of the Rock is actually different from the version used in the Quran.
I know. I haven't heard about this. Not sure about that.
Okay, well, I'll have to look into it then.
But yeah, so Christians and Muslims are always fighting over this, like the Quran having multiple versions versus the Bible, and which one is more reliable. Frankly speaking, like Bart Ehrman gets a lot of messages from Muslim. He got so annoyed of getting messages. He actually posted something on his blog. I'm a subscriber to his blog. And he said, listen, guys, just because you have lots of copies of the Quran from Uthman's time doesn't mean that's the same Quran that Muhammad had, right? Or the same recitation, right? Because there's a gap there, right?
Uthman deliberately burned all contrasting copies.
Yeah.
So, of course, you don't have contrasting copies.
But then then, we still ended up with little variants, right? So there's a Hafs version, there's a Warsh, and they actually recite these in mosques, believe it or not. In mosques in the world, in different parts of the world, they recite the Quran a little bit differently in Arabic, it actually shocks Muslims sometimes because, like I said, not scholarly Muslims, but the common Muslim doesn't know this. So when you get an imam that comes for Ramadan from like Morocco or something, and he reads it differently, it uses a different word. People are like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, that's not the one I know. And sometimes they'll have to explain, hey guys, this is this variant. And people don't realize that, yes, the Quran is more. I'm actually reading a book on this right now, which is by Sean Anthony, which is on the preservation, or not on the preservation of the Quran, but the historical Muhammad, trying to find the historical Muhammad. So it's quite interesting. But basically, the multiple variants have a little bit different language here and there, and not that significant necessarily, but there are multiple versions, and they have a chain, just like Hadith has a chain. They have a chain going back that this person narrated from this person, that this, and then it has a sort of like, it's kind of an appeal to authority, like this scholar has approved this version, this scholar has approved this version. So and there's even hadith that say the Quran was revealed in 7 dialects. So it seems to me most likely that hadith was like a post hoc sort of fabrication, because
after the fact explanation.
how do you explain these variants, right? Oh, it was revealed in 7 versions. Okay.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Done.
This is like the stuff you say about the justifications and reasoning for Islam. I remember very similar things as a Christian. You may have heard the claim that 500 people saw Jesus after his death.
Yeah.
Even as a Christian, I repeated that because someone had told me who was a minister, and so I thought they would know. Until I found out what the source was.
Which is?
It's literally a throwaway verse in one of Paul's letters, which might have been an interpolation, that literally just says, and 500 people saw him all at once after his resurrection. That's it.
Yeah.
It's like, cool story, bro. It doesn't have any names. It doesn't have a location. It doesn't have a time except after his resurrection, which, you know, thanks. That's specific. It doesn't have anything that he said at that time. It doesn't have any corroborating details. It's just throw away 500 people. It doesn't even say 500 people, including these 3 who you could totes talk to.
The most important event in all of history, which was the resurrection of Jesus, you don't even have a good like evidence for it. It's just some letters and some people.
More, we have evidence against it.
Oh yeah.
Christians have provided sort of a myth about the way that crucifixions were conducted to fitting with their story.
Oh yeah.
That's not what happened. Common criminals, for one, they didn't take them off the cross before the Sabbath because Rome was very tolerant of religions, except when they interfered with someone being executed for treason. So, cough. They were not given back to their families, nor were they ever released as part of a tradition. In fact, the really ironic thing is that there was an occasion somewhere else in the Roman Empire where it's like, oh, in honor of the special festival, we'll give a boon to one of these prisoners to be crucified. It wasn't to not be crucified. It was that they would be special because their family would actually get their body instead of having it just thrown in a pit with all the other criminals.
Yeah.
That was a special dispensation.
Yes. Have you heard Bart Ehrman's explanation of this low Christology to high Christology? I know it's kind of
the Mark,
controversial.
Matthew, Luke,
Yeah.
Absolutely, and he's right.
Yeah,
most of the stuff about Jesus' deity is pretty much taken entirely from the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
Was not written by John.
It's interesting that to me, so as an ex-Muslim, it was interesting to me to hear this. Now, I know a lot of Christians will argue black and blue. That's not the case. They'll say even in Mark, he was God, and even in John, he's God. He's always God. It wasn't like but the way it's explained, Bart Ehrman explains it, is that in the beginning, Jesus became God when he died. And then in the later gospel, he became God when he was resurrected. And then in the later gospel, the latest gospel, John,
was when he was baptized, and then he was always God.
He's always God, right? Now, and there seems to be, I mean, again, it's very controversial among Christians, but there seems to be a progression. Now, the interesting thing is the fact that Jesus being born of a virgin, that happens. I think it was in Luke. I forget. Anyways, it's in the middle.
It's Matthew and Luke.
Matthew and Luke. So in Matthew and Luke, for the first time, we hear that Jesus was born of a virgin, and somehow this ended up in the Quran. Now that's what I find interesting. It's like you see the progression of the story, and then you see it in another religion, and it's like, hey, that's where it came from. Isn't that interesting? And the other thing I found that was very interesting was the whole Jews don't believe in an afterlife, in heaven and hell. Jews don't.
Not anymore.
Yeah, and they don't even believe in Satan per se. It's a little bit of a different character in the Old Testament.
Satan, the opposer.
And yet in Islam, and another thing about Judaism is there's no ban on alcohol per se. Again, drinking alcohol, right? Whereas in Islam, I mean, there's such a thing as kosher alcohol, right? Kosher wine. I guess. But in Islam, it's completely forbidden. But supposedly, this is the same religion. So to me, this caused a lot of cognitive dissonance when I found out. I'm like, what? Like, that's weird.
It's funny because as a Christian, we were encouraged to feel the touch of the Holy Spirit. And looking back, I can see that the pain of cognitive dissonance is something that I frequently internalized as the touch of God, because it's emotionally painful, but it feels like something real. And so, of course,
Yeah,
it must be God.
I wanted to go to the questions now. And oh, by the way, before we go any further, do you want to share any of your? So you're on Twitter as well. So I'm going to share your Twitter, but you also have a
please
podcast.
do.
Yeah. So you guys
I have a YouTube channel, which I'm returning to with some stories from a survivor of evangelicalism.
Is it a Veritas Voices?
Lilith Liberated.
Oh, okay.
And then there's Veritas Voices, which is the podcast I run with Renee, also known as Renevelation from Germany, who you have already interviewed. And I like to come on other people's shows and talk and debate and all the rest of it.
Awesome.
I mean, even today, we didn't get to go to the part about what I learned about Islam from reading 1,000 Nights and One Night.
Oh, yeah?
The actual, the original, 4 volumes worth of the original Tales of Scheherazade.
I haven't read that.
It's interesting. Apparently, there used to be a phrase that was quite common, which was, "There shall be no virgins in Islam."
That's interesting.
I mean, I think it was a kickback against nuns and the concept of a religious version. But at the same time, I can't really imagine a Muslim saying that today.
No, but that's an interesting thing too, how religion plays on men's desire for sex in the afterlife and to kind of, encourage jihad. I mean, that's where this comes out a lot more, right? The whole virgin thing. And some actual think tanks and research bodies have shown that this is an actual motivation for, unfortunately, suicide bombing and stuff like that. Right? It's just this is used to get people, it's kind of like religion creates a problem and then solves it the wrong way. You know what I mean? It creates this problem of every
scam is the same.
Yeah.
Create problem, invent solution, profit.
Yeah. So someone is saying these guys are so lost. They're just trying to demonize Muslims. What do you say to that?
I've heard the same thing from a lot of people of faith, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
What you told me earlier, I've said myself. I think the majority of Muslims are just decent people. They want what we all want. They want a good job, a happy family, a stable living situation. They want kids. They want their kids to have kids so that they can spoil their grandchildren. They want to taste that recipe they grew up on that they have such fond memories of. Most people are the same. They just want good lives. And there's a difference between, and a lot of Muslims will not accept this, but nonetheless, it is true. There is a difference between criticizing Islam and criticizing Muslims.
And demonizing.
Demonizing.
Yeah.
Islam is a religion. A religion is a set of ideas. And most of the ideas of Islam are very, 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 very bad. Mm-hmm. Even the good ideas are usually thrown on top to try and cover a bad thing, like totes, religion of peace, never mind the warlord and the cutting off of heads, shut up.
Yeah.
There's a difference. It's like someone said it was like, you hate cancer patients because you hate cancer. No.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's harder for you as a white woman to criticize Islam than me as a brown guy?
Probably.
There's more lashback towards you, right? Because of identity politics and, hey, those poor Muslims, why are you attacking them? I think that's pretty much the case.
Because they would make me dress in a garbage bag and cut off my head or whip me publicly if I refused. See, this is the thing. Maybe it's just me. I never cared about identity politics except as it affects what we might actually know about the other side and thus be relevant to how accurate our understanding of a thing is. Mm-hmm. people are going to kick back against me. I've
Yeah.
already set myself up against the major faith in my culture.
Yep.
I don't care. I'm going to keep telling the truth. That's it.
And why is it important to you to do this? That's something I wanted to talk about.
The truth
Why
is
are
the
you an
highest
atheist
value
YouTuber?
to me.
Hmm?
Well, there are several reasons, but ultimately it comes down to what I value most. And what I value most is truth. I have always valued truth. When I thought Christianity was true, it was the most important thing in my life. And when I realized it was false, and I came to terms with exactly how much harm had been caused, with no, but it's all for the good justification, then I became determined to fight it.
Yeah.
Lies kill people.
Yeah.
Lies don't just kill the people who believe in them, they kill the innocent. And I will fight that until the day I die.
But do you find, that's a great response, do you find that people struggle with meaning in life being atheist? Like a lot of people have this, they connect their identity to Christianity or Islam. When they leave it, they're just like, oh, life, I don't have any meaning in life. I mean, that's what's portrayed by many believers. In fact,
the lack of meaning is something believers fear. And when you actually lose your faith, you go, oh, wait, that totally wasn't a thing.
You know, I think you're right for some people, but I know believers that went through this as well. Like one of my friends, obviously I can't say his name, but he had a year or so where he had this massive pain in his life trying to resolve there's no God. Who's going to take care of his daughter after he dies? Somehow he thought God's going to take care of his daughter. To me, it never made sense because God doesn't take care of everyone's daughters and sons after they die anyways. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that happen in life. So, but somehow this was the way he saw it. And it took him a while, and now he's happy, he's doing well, he's thankful. I mean, I get thank you messages all the time from people saying, thank you so much. I put a poll on Twitter saying, I mean, Twitter, unfortunately, anyone can respond, so it's hard to say it's limited to ex-Muslims, but the majority said they're better off now leaving the religion Islam behind, ex-Muslims. It's supposed to be a poll for ex-Muslims only, and they said overall, the majority, 80% plus, even if Muslims were voting and saying, no, I wish I never left Islam, still 80% ended up voting that they're better off now. So I don't think,
did.
Yeah.
I conducted a similar poll. It's a while back, probably a year and a half ago at least, where I asked people basically if as atheists they were afraid of death, and to comment if that had increased or decreased if they had lost their faith. And by and large, the response of people was that after their deconversion, and there were exceptions, but by and large, they were happier, more confident, less afraid of death, less afraid of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Just better off in a way. And I understand the pain that that man went through, because when I realized, like, wait, it's not just that I haven't quite got it all. It's that this is total bullshit that I've based my entire life on to this point.
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
I spent 3 days just feeling like the world had stopped making any sense.
Yeah.
And because with that also comes the idea that death is permanent. And that's a hard thing to come to terms with if you've never been able to come to terms with it before.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I was just thinking about this a couple of days ago. I feel like it's a sort of mental maturity to accept life for what it is. It takes strength to accept that there is no God. I mean, there's no evidence of God. Let's just say that. Okay, maybe you believe in God. You don't have to disbelieve in God. I don't care. But it takes mental strength to say there's no God that's going to take care of me. There's probably no heaven and hell. I mean, I think there's obviously no heaven and hell. I've got to the point now where when I see, like I was watching a movie with my wife about this lady that was, her husband died, got in an accident. I forgot what it was called. And when she started praying, Lord Jesus, I almost started laughing when I think about, she's talking to her imaginary friend saying, fix my husband, that supposedly her same imaginary friend caused him to get into the accident. But now she's telling her imaginary friend, hey, fix my husband, make him better, heal him, whatever.
Yeah, when you pray to God to fix the wrong, is it because he caused the wrong or because he didn't know it was wrong? it's the problem of evil, which becomes a problem when you have a single good God that you're trying to make responsible for everything. At least polytheists could be like, oh no, that's just the asshole over there. That's Loki fucking about.
Well, that's why Satan was invented, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, in Islam, Satan is different than in Christianity. In Islam,
how is he different?
Well, in Islam, Satan is under God's control completely. And in the sense that he allowed him to do these bad things. It's not like a battle between good and evil. There's no battle between good and evil in Islam. And I think more Muslims have, I think less Muslims have an issue with the problem of evil than Christians, because it's kind of different. It's presented in a different way, you know?
I mean, we also hear the excuse that he permitted Satan to do blah, 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 blah. Actually, if you read Milton's Paradise Lost, which begins with Satan and his angels on the floor of hell and adamantine chains and fire that is darkness visible, and then says to them, then Satan lifts up his head and it's, who but the almighty power permitted never could have raised. Like the whole idea being only because God let him stand up, he stood back up.
That's also in Christianity. I didn't know that.
It is, but it's also framed as a rebellion of angels, so they're rebelling and God is letting them rebel because something free will. And well, the verses in the Bible actually say he's showing off for his glory, that he's going to murder the fuck out of everyone because he is so
that's interesting.
Special.
Talking about the angels thing, I just quickly want to throw this out there because we're getting close to ending the stream. It's interesting that in Christianity, Iblis or Satan is a fallen angel, correct? Now in Islam, there's this issue. I wanted to make a video about it, but I didn't get a chance yet, where he's not an angel, but he's among the angels, and Allah says to the angels,
is he a jinn?
Yes, but here's the thing. In the Quran, it says Allah says to the angels, bow down, and they all did except Iblis. Yet later on in the Quran, oh, by the way, Iblis is not an angel, he's a jinn. Jinns are completely different from angels. They're made of fire and angels are made of light. But it's like, what? Like, okay, here.
There was a preview for a movie I saw where it says, in the beginning, God made man of earth, the angels of light, and the jinn of fire. And I was like, oh, that looks really cool.
Yeah. And it's a problem in Islam because the story was imported, and it doesn't make any sense anymore, because why was so Muslim scholars will say, well, Iblis was a jinn that was special, that was among the angels. But then why would God say to the angels bow down and Iblis didn't? Well,
all praise be to Allah. Any other worship is a sin, but Allah ordered all creation to bow down to Adam.
That's weird too, isn't it? That's another weird thing. Yeah. Now I wanted to, before we end it, I want to share one thing, because this was, obviously I'm being accused of bigotry. And I want to share this article that I wrote. I mean, it's unfortunate that I even need to do such a stupid thing like write an article like this. But like,
I know
I've written an article on this that shows that I have gone out of my way to defend Muslims from bigotry, because I feel responsible in a sense. Okay, this is something that many ex-Muslims go through. And it's been 5 years now. I've resolved it in my mind, and I'm confident that I'm not doing bigotry. But it's a question. And I remember when I first left Islam, there were some ex-Muslims that became Muslim again just because of the hate against Muslims, and they did not want to be part of that. And
it's like a clannishness almost.
It's like and it's like you don't want people to be, you don't want to be used. This is a problem for ex-Muslims. Like I said, the far right, Hindu extremists and even the far right Christians like to use ex-Muslims to attack Muslims. Say, look, even this guy says, I agree, Islam is bad, but we don't want to throw all Muslims under the bus. Yes, some Muslims are bad too, like in any other community.
Christianity is terrible. Christianity is literally a cult of blood magic and human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Most Christians are better people than that.
Yeah.
Most Muslims are better people than their faith. One of the things that struck me in my church when I lost my faith was God doesn't deserve the devotion of these people. He does fuck all for them. The excuses, blame people for the lack of faith anytime they don't get whatever the hell it was that they were promised. apparently, and God doesn't deserve them. People of faith, a lot of the, maybe not some of the leaders, but most people of faith are better than their faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's saying, check out Hamza Yusuf. He's a Muslim scholar and he shows true Islam. What is true Islam?
You know, that's the thing. I finally had to block Saqib Mir because he's such an asshole. But he was an Ahmadi Muslim, which Ahmadi Muslim, who I understood to be a little less literalistic and a little more mystical about things. Like they might. Nope.
They're the other way. Like next level, like twisting, like they don't believe in miracles. Check this out. They don't believe in miracles. Yeah. So but the problem is this: the Quran is full of miracles. The Quran has
believe that
the Quran has
the moon and the
Quran has ants talking and saying, "Watch out, because we're gonna get crushed by Solomon," something like that. They completely reinterpret the story to make it like naturalistic, like not like special, because they don't believe in miracles, because they're like, well, the laws of the universe are the laws of the universe. Allah set them in motion. They cherry pick like crazy. And my good friend Reason on Faith, Sohail Ahmed, who's called them out, you know, he's got blocked by some of these guys because they're inconsistent, right? How are you a Muslim if you don't believe in these things? It's just like
and you know, there are lots of people who say Adam and Eve is a myth. It's meant to say that we should, you know, follow God's guidance even when we don't understand, blah 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 blah. You could say that, you could sell it like that. It is less completely out of line with reality. But yeah, it's partly more difficult because at least Christianity in principle and Judaism admit that men wrote the book, devised the words. There are some crazy fundamentalists who believe that God used people as dictaphones, but it is like, what am I typing? I don't even know. But most of the time, even my father used to constantly quote, I believe it was Jeremiah, where it says the prophecy is subject to the spirit of the prophet.
Oh, yeah.
So every prophecy that comes out, you know, it will have a color of the person who's speaking because they're the ones speaking. If you write with a red pen, it's still going to be red, whatever you say.
Yeah. And someone's saying in a comment that there's a quote in the Quran that says, if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of all people. The interesting thing is that comes from I forget what it was. Someone in the comments will probably explain. It comes from, I forget if it's a Torah or if it comes from the where is it? It says, if he decreed for the children of Israel that whoever saves a life, it would be as if he saved all of mankind. It's not even saying that in general. It's just saying that specific. And that actually is that quote is taken from another book, which is interesting.
Ishak, you need to learn about set theory before you talk about math again, because you clearly have no clue what you're talking about.
I don't know why he's debating math.
SET, set theory.
Talmud, yes, thank you, Riaz. It was in the Talmud. Thank you. Yeah,
Talmud, of course.
A lot of Islam comes from the Talmud and the influence of the Talmud.
Because I did not know that.
You know why? I think because the Jews, the Arab Jews at the time of Muhammad, were like telling the stories, and the Talmud is more accessible than the Torah, right? So like a lot of the stories from the Talmud ended up in the Quran, right? For example, Cain and Abel and the fighting. And
is Lilith in the Quran?
No.
Damn it.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know why we're debating set. Why is so gung ho about set theory? Anyways, and
this is it's again, it's trying to take something that actually works and credit it to God after the fact.
Is this like saying, oh, you don't believe in you know, how do you even know that you exist, kind of thing? Like, oh, you don't believe in Islam?
Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. If I didn't exist in some form, I wouldn't be thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, Muhammad plagiarized as usual. So he did, which, like, of course he did.
Yeah,
Wasn't he
absolutely.
friends with the Arabic Muslim or with the Arabic Jews for a while at
Yeah,
the beginning of his
yep.
revelation? Because it came in
He
like
was
three
he was
sets.
appealing to them. He was appealing to them
He
to the
was
point.
appealing to them, and
Yeah,
they were tentatively like not
going to
buying
be.
it,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like, okay, well, we'll hear you out. And that was what brought about the from Mecca to Medina,
yes,
because the
yes. The Qibla.
polytheists were like,
Yeah,
fuck off, we can worship our
yeah,
stone, and he went
yeah,
to the Jews, and they were
yeah.
like, okay, let's hear you out.
Yeah,
Ultimately, they decided the same thing they decided about Jesus. He's full of shit. But
yeah.
initially, they would have been talking about him and probably going over the Talmud.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that seems to be the case as well, that he was appealing to the Jews. He was hoping that they would give the stamp of approval because he was using their stories. I guess he thought, well, maybe I can be one of their prophets. Of course, they didn't buy it, like you said, and eventually he became outright hostile, to the point that before he died, he said, I will expel all of the Christians and Jews from the Arabian Peninsula. He smashed all of the idols of the polytheists. So talk about freedom of religion. There is no freedom of religion with Muhammad. Destroyed all of the competing and kicked out the Christians and the Jews, right? So
God is not begotten, does not beget, and is not begotten.
Yep.
And and it's true, that toxicity and that hatred carried on in the culture. I talk about the Tales of Scheherazade because in them you could see a lot of the attitude come through when a Muslim champion goes in war against a Christian champion. They're fighting a one-on-one honorable battle. Like, it's not, they're both soldiers. And, then the Muslim strikes down the Christian, whose soul immediately goes out his ass to hell. Like, literally, it wasn't just he goes to hell. His soul went out his rectum and was pulled to hell.
Where was this?
Like,
where did you hear this?
Again, Tales of Scheherazade, 1,000 Nights and One Night.
Yeah.
That was where I first heard about the idea of, remember that woman from, that Muslim woman last year, I believe.
Oh,
who
the
said
Muhammad thing?
No, the one about the worms and the gay people, how homosexual men had a worm inside them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of popular ancient culture in that story. I haven't heard any of these things before. I do know that in Sunni Islam.
Well, she was in the news, but in the story itself, initially, it was used to excuse a woman who wanted sex too much, basically.
Yeah. Odd, very odd.
This man had to rescue. It was this really racist story, honestly.
Yeah.
And then this man had to rescue her by going to some woman and getting a thing of vinegar and entice it out with this magical potion.
Yeah. Yep. That's hilarious. I think if I read it, I'd be like, oh, that's comes from Islam. That's kind of weird. And there's an interesting kind of connection between Islam and culture, and they influence each other. And like, I remember hearing as a Muslim the stories about people that listen to music and the grave went on fire, or the body was expelled from the earth. Like, there's no hadith like that, but like somehow Muslims made up these stories about all these bad things that happen to you if you listen to music and this and that. But anyways, we've gone on for an hour and a half.
Yes, I'm sorry. I want
to say thank you so much for this conversation.
It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Absolutely.
And maybe we'll have like a panel discussion next time. We'll get a couple of people on, yourself and a few others, and it would be interesting.
That would be interesting. Having like a specific topic to discuss would be awesome, because I love obviously talking to people and getting ideas and but of course that can go on forever. Yeah,
totally. And thank you all for joining this conversation. I haven't done a video in a while. I've been busy with the whole coronavirus thing, kids at home and homeschooling, and obviously office work and so many other things. But I'm glad to take a break and have this conversation with you, Lilith. And glad to meet you. And everyone do check out Lilith's channel. I'll put it in the comments as well, both her own channel and the podcast that she's doing with Zen Evolution. And stay tuned. Hopefully I'll come up with some new videos soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.